You're not supposed to think like everyone else. You're supposed to think like yourself. Not the self you were told to be, but the one buried beneath the noise. The one who watches, who questions, who feels, and refuses to accept the surface as the whole. Because most people are asleep. They move but they're not alive. They talk but they don't say anything real. They work but they don't know why. And that's the first lesson. Most people are just surviving, not thinking, not questioning, not choosing. They follow the script. They play the role, they check the boxes, and then one day they wonder where their life went. If you don't want that, you must wake up. You must pause, look around, and ask yourself, who gave me this map, and do I trust where it leads? Because the way you've been taught to think is not the only way. What if success isn't what you've been told? What if failure is more valuable than winning? What if rest is not laziness but preparation? This is how the shift begins, not with answers, but with better questions. And those questions, they will cost you, because once you see, you can't unsee. Once, you can't unknow. You begin to notice the lies, the illusions, the pressure, the belief that you must always be productive, that you must always be happy, that you must always be doing something to prove your worth. But what if your worth was never based on what you do but on who you are? What if your value is not measured by metrics but by meaning? That's where life begins to change. Not when you add more, but when you subtract. When you stop chasing and start choosing. When you stop reacting and start reflecting. Because the second lesson is this: growth is subtraction before it's addition. You grow by letting go, by releasing the people, the beliefs, the habits that no longer fit where you're going. It's not easy. It's not clean. It's not quick. But it's real. And that's what you want, isn't it? Not more noise, but more truth. Not more approval, but more alignment. Not more stuff, but more soul. That means you'll have to walk away from what's familiar, from what's expected, from what's popular, and into the unknown, into the silence, into the questions no one is asking. But in that space you'll find yourself, the part of you that isn't afraid to be misunderstood, that doesn't need to explain, that no longer needs the world's permission to be whole. This is the inner rebellion. It doesn't make a scene. It makes a decision to stop living someone else's dream and start living your truth. And that brings us to the third lesson. You are not your thoughts. You are the one observing them. And most of what you think is not even yours. It's inherited from culture, from parents, from teachers, from trauma, from media. You were programmed, like all of us. But that doesn't mean you must stay that way. You can deprogram. You can pause and look at a thought and ask, is this true or just familiar? Does this thought serve me or sabotage me? Because you cannot change your life if you do not change your mind. And you cannot change your mind if you never challenge it. So, challenge it. Ask why. Ask what if. Ask who told you this. And what did they gain by you believing it? Because freedom. Real freedom is not physical. It is mental. To be free in your mind is to walk through life without chains even when the world tries to bind you. And that kind of freedom does not come cheap. It requires self-awareness. It requires emotional honesty. It requires the courage to say, I was wrong. And most people would rather stay in pain than admit they were wrong. Don't be most people. Be the one who questions and therefore transforms. Because transformation doesn't come from information. It comes from revelation. From the moment something Inside you says, I can't live like this anymore. And you listen and you move and you begin again. That's where the shift begins, and once it begins, there's no going back. The difference between people who change their life and those who don't is not knowledge, it's commitment. We all know. We know what hurts us. We know what heals us. We know what drains us. We know what builds us. But knowing is not enough. There is no reward for potential, only for follow-through. And follow-through is what most people lack, not because they're weak, but because they've built the habit of quitting on themselves. It starts small. You say, I'll do it tomorrow. Then tomorrow becomes next week, and next week becomes one day. But one day isn't real. It's a stall tactic. It's an emotional escape hatch. It's a way to feel comfort without facing discomfort. But if you keep doing that, you'll wake up in a life you didn't choose. Life made up of laters and almosts, and I was going to, and that will hurt more than any sacrifice you could have made today. So you must build a new identity, one that says, I do what I said I would do, even when I don't feel like it. That is the beginning of transformation. When you show your nervous system that discomfort is not danger, that inconvenience is not injury, that consistency is not punishment but freedom. Because real freedom is not found in doing whatever you want. It's found in doing what must be done because your future depends on it. That is where your mind stops being your prison and starts being your weapon. But you have to train it. Every day the world will try to hijack your attention, to flood your senses with urgency, with comparison, with shortcuts. But you are not obligated to react. You can pause. You can breathe. You can remember your values before you respond to their volume. Because not every notification is a priority. Not every opportunity is aligned. Not every invitation is meant for you. Clarity is saying no, more than you say yes. And courage is not in what you chase, but in what you walk away from. There is strength in refusal, in stillness, in waiting. That's something most people never learn. They confuse speed with progress. But movement does not always mean momentum. You can run in circles with great effort and arrive nowhere new. You can fill your schedule and still feel empty. You can work 14 hours a day and still avoid the one conversation. That would change everything. So ask yourself, what am I really avoiding? Because beneath most procrastination is not laziness. It's fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of success. Fear of outgrowing what you once called home. But if you don't face it, it will follow you everywhere you go. In every job, every relationship, every habit, until you confront it, name it, and walk through it. That is what courage really is. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's quiet and persistent. It's the decision to show up, even when it would be easier to stay asleep. It's the choice to speak truth, even when your voice shakes. It's the act of protecting your boundaries, even when people don't understand. That's what builds the person you've been trying to become. Not a new vision board, not another podcast, not another quote on your wall, but 1,000 quiet decisions made in moments of tension that no one sees and no one celebrates. And that is enough. You don't need a stage. You need a system. You don't need followers. You need focus. You don't need more opinions. You need more silence, because in silence you remember who you are, what you value, where you're going, and what you're no longer willing to carry with you. Let this be the day you stop begging for clarity and start building it, not with grand moves, but with simple integrity. Keep your word, respect your time, tell the truth, and protect your peace. Like your life depends on it, because it does. Everything changes. When you stop asking, what do I feel like doing? And start asking, what does the highest version of me require? Because if you only act when you feel like it, you'll stay stuck in cycles of comfort, distraction, and regret. Feelings are valid, but they are not the steering wheel. They are weather passing through, not the road, not the map, and certainly not the driver. If you want to think differently, live differently, be different, you must act differently, regardless of mood, regardless of fear, regardless of who is watching. Because excellence is not emotional, it is habitual. It is not about bursts of intensity. It is about consistency over time, in silence, without reward, without reassurance. This is where most people fall. They expect motivation to carry them through. But motivation is loud at first, then fades. And if you have built your life on that fire, it will leave you cold. But if you build your life on principle, on structure, on truth, you don't need fire to keep moving. You need clarity. And clarity only comes from discipline, not from punishment, but from devotion to something greater, to something meaningful, to the life you were actually called to live. That kind of discipline looks boring on the outside. It's not glamorous. It's not loud. It's not performative. It's waking up early when no one tells you to. It's saying no when no one would blame you for saying yes. It's leaving the room when your integrity is at risk, even if no one would ever find out. It is living in alignment, even when the world doesn't reward it. Because the reward is not outside. It's within. It's peace. It's self-respect. It's knowing that when everything is stripped away, you are still proud of the way you chose to live. That is what changes your mind forever. Not more books, but better decisions, not more theory, but tested values, not more opinions, but unwavering clarity. And clarity is not found in the crowd. It's found in the quiet, where you can hear your thoughts, where you can meet your fears, where you can face the truth that most of what's wrong in your life did not come from failure. It came from avoidance, avoiding the conversation, avoiding the mirror, avoiding the discipline. So let this be the year you stop running, the year you look your patterns in the face and say, no more. No more justifying what drains you. No more excusing what confuses you. No more pretending not to know what is costing you peace. It's not always easy to think clearly, but it becomes easier when you stop lying to yourself. And that begins with questions. What am I avoiding? Who am I becoming? What pain am I clinging to that feels familiar but is no longer useful? Pain is not the enemy. Unexamined pain is. You must go in, sit with it, feel it, and then release it. You are not broken. You are buried beneath the expectations, the distractions, the versions of you that were never truly yours. Peel them back, all of them, until what's left is not performance but presence. That is what will move you. That is what will hold you when motivation leaves, when applause stops, when the room goes quiet, and the world will try to pull you away from this. It will sell you shortcuts. It will bait you with noise. It will test you with praise. But you must remain unmoved, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. And clarity becomes a shield when you've earned it, when you've built it, through habits that honor your vision, not your feelings, through decisions that reflect your standards, not your convenience. That is how you become someone who cannot be shaken. Because now your life is not built on hope but on execution, not on chance but on choice, not on theory but on truth. And truth always holds. Everything changes when you stop asking, what do I feel like doing? And start asking, What does the highest version of me require? Because if you only act when you feel like it, you'll stay stuck in cycles of comfort, distraction, and regret. Feelings are valid, but they are not the steering wheel. They are weather passing through, not the road, not the map, and certainly not the driver. If you want to think differently, live differently, be different, you must act differently, regardless of mood, regardless of fear, regardless of who is watching. Because excellence is not emotional, it is habitual. It is not about bursts of intensity. It is about consistency over time. In silence, without reward, without reassurance. This is where most people fall. They expect motivation to carry them through. But motivation is loud at first, then fades. And if you have built your life on that fire, it will leave you cold. But if you build your life on principle, on structure, on truth, you don't need fire to keep moving. You need clarity. And clarity only comes from discipline, not from punishment, but from devotion to something greater, to something meaningful, to the life you were actually called to live. That kind of discipline looks boring on the outside. It's not glamorous. It's not loud. It's not performative. It's waking up early when no one tells you to. It's saying no when no one would blame you for saying yes. It's leaving the room when your integrity is at risk, even if no one would ever find out. It is living in alignment, even when the world doesn't reward it. Because the reward is not outside. It's within. It's peace. It's self-respect. It's knowing that when everything is stripped away, you are still proud of the way you chose to live. That is what changes your mind forever. Not more books, but better decisions. Not more theory, but tested values. Not more opinions, but unwavering clarity. And clarity is not found in the crowd. It's found in the quiet, where you can hear your thoughts, where you can meet your fears, where you can face the truth. That most of what's wrong in your life did not come from failure. It came from avoidance, avoiding the conversation, avoiding the mirror, avoiding the discipline. So let this be the year you stop running, the year you look your patterns in the face and say no more. No more justifying what drains you. No more excusing what confuses you. No more pretending not to know what is costing you peace. It's not always easy to think clearly, but it becomes easier when you stop lying to yourself. And that begins with questions. What am I avoiding? Who am I becoming? What pain am I clinging to that feels familiar but is no longer useful? Pain is not the enemy. Unexamined pain is. You must go in, sit with it, feel it, and then release it. You are not broken. You are buried beneath the expectations, the distractions, the versions of you that were never truly yours. Peel them back, all of them, until what's left is not performance but presence. That is what will move you. That is what will hold you when motivation leaves, when applause stops, when the room goes quiet, and the world will try to pull you away from this. It will sell you shortcuts. It will bait you with noise. It will test you with praise. But you must remain unmoved, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. And clarity becomes a shield when you've earned it, when you've built it. Through habits that honor your vision, not your feelings. Through decisions that reflect your standards, not your convenience. That is how you become someone who cannot be shaken. Because now your life is not built on hope but on execution, not on chance but on choice, not on theory but on truth. And truth always holds. When you shift from thinking emotionally to thinking intentionally, you begin to lead your life instead of reacting to it. Most people never make that shift. They live in response to pressure, to fear, to distraction, to approval. But leadership, real leadership, starts with the self, with leading your thoughts before they lead you, with leading your schedule before it fills with noise, with leading your energy before it is drained by everything that doesn't serve you. This is where thinking changes forever, when you stop outsourcing direction and take full responsibility for where you place your attention, your energy, your time. Because attention is your most valuable currency. Whatever you give it to grows. Feed drama, and it expands. Feed fear, and it dominates. Feed clarity, and it begins to shape your reality. You are always investing. Every moment, every thought, every conversation. So ask yourself, is this thought an investment or a leak? Is this habit an anchor or a compass? Is this relationship fuel or friction? Thinking clearly is not about having the right answers. It's about asking better questions, and better questions come from silence, stillness, space. You cannot hear your deeper wisdom if your mind is flooded with urgency, with input, with opinions. So carve out the silence. Make time for it. Fight for it. Not as a luxury, but as a necessity. Because without that pause, you are not living. You are reacting. And a reactive life is not your life. It is a program, a script, a series of unconscious loops that keep you spinning, but never arriving. This is what Stoicism cuts through. The illusion, the noise, the emotional chaos. It returns you to the root, to what you control, to what you value, to what truly matters. And what truly matters is often small, unseen, boring to the world, but sacred to the soul. Waking up early, not to post it, but to prepare. Exercising, not to perform, but to stay ready. Writing your thoughts, not for content, but for clarity. These are not strategies. They are lifelines, habits that hold you when the world doesn't. Disciplines that sharpen you when emotions cloud the view. Standards that protect you when everything outside you pulls for compromise. You do not rise in chaos. You rise in structure. Not rigid rules, but chosen rituals. Repeated actions that align your body with your values, your behavior with your vision. Because a man without structure becomes whatever the moment demands. A man with structure becomes whoever the mission requires. That's the difference. The first is a leaf tossed by wind. The second is a root anchored in purpose. So ask yourself, what anchors you? What holds when the day unravels? What steadies you when pressure hits? What brings you back when doubt creeps in? It cannot be someone else. It cannot be a result. It must be within you, a standard, a principle, a promise. That no matter what happens, you will not betray who you are becoming. That is your power. And that is what most people never develop, because it takes time. It takes stillness. It takes a level of self-respect that is built alone, in quiet without applause. But when it's built, you cannot be moved, because your mind is no longer a victim of your environment. It is the architect of your future. It is not the chaos outside that breaks a man. It is the chaos within that goes ungoverned. And until you learn to rule yourself, you will be ruled by everything else. Your doubts, your cravings, your triggers, your emotions, your memories. This is the silent war. Not against others, but against the parts of you that want to stay comfortable at the cost of your potential, and you will not win it once. You will fight it every single day. But every battle is an opportunity. Every moment of resistance is a place to become stronger, to respond, not with reaction but with reason, to choose not what is easy, but what is aligned. That is what makes a man rare, not his results, but his restraint. Because everyone wants to speak. Few want to listen. Everyone wants to move. Few want to think. Everyone wants more, but few can handle stillness. And stillness is the birthplace of clarity. Stillness is where you meet yourself without distraction, without noise, without the need to perform. It is where you hear what is real, what is broken, what is waiting for your attention, but most avoid it. Because what you find in stillness is never what your ego wants to see. It is only what your soul needs to heal. And healing requires honesty, not surface honesty, but radical self-confrontation. The kind that says, this is where I betrayed myself. This is the pattern I've been avoiding. This is the excuse I've made sacred. That level of honesty does not come easy. It takes the death of who you were pretending to be. But when that version dies, you make space for who you really are. Not in theory, but in action. Not in dreams, but in discipline. And this is why most never change. Because change requires loss. Not always loss of things, but loss of identity. Loss of the story you've been clinging to. Because it's familiar, even though it's false. To grow, you must outgrow. Outgrow your comfort. Outgrow your distractions. Outgrow your need to be understood by people who don't even understand themselves. That's when you begin to live. When you stop explaining and start embodying. When you stop defending and start deciding. When you stop reacting and start ruling. That's what Stoic thinking offers you. Not escape but engagement. Not safety but sovereignty. A throne built not on pride but on presence. To sit with yourself as you are and still choose to be better. Not because you hate yourself, but because you've seen what you're capable of. When you stop getting in your own way. And yes, you will lose people. You will outgrow conversations, you will walk alone, but you will be in alignment. And alignment is more valuable than agreement. It is the compass that keeps you steady when life spins. It is the anchor that holds you when approval fades. It is the voice that whispers, keep going, even when everything else is loud. Because now you no longer think like everyone else. You no longer need the crowd to feel strong. You have found your rhythm, your focus, your foundation, and that cannot be taken. Because it was never given by the world. It was earned by the man who decided enough was enough. There is a moment in every man's life when silence becomes louder than applause, when solitude feels more honest than conversation, when progress becomes more about subtraction than addition. And that moment is the beginning of transformation. Because now you are no longer seduced by what is impressive. You are committed to what is essential. You stop asking, what do they think of me? And start asking, who am I when no one is watching? This is where most people fall. They build an identity around visibility, around performance, around approval. But when the lights go off and the room empties, they're left with a version of themselves that feels foreign, unanchored, silent. That silence is not your enemy. It is your compass. Because in that silence, you hear everything you've been avoiding. And what you avoid owns you. The conversation you refuse to have controls your relationship. The habit you excuse controls your discipline. The story you defend controls your potential. So the question is, what are you willing to face? Because you can only lead what you are willing to confront. Your mind, your fears, your past, your laziness, your ego. No one escapes this work. No matter how rich, how talented, how admired, the work is always waiting. And it doesn't care about your excuses. It only responds to your honesty. So be honest, not dramatic, not performative, just honest. Where are you weak? Where are you hiding? Where are you out of alignment? Don't judge it. Don't explain it, just meet it with presence, with posture, with resolve. This is what changes you, not the knowledge, but the courage to apply it, not the inspiration, but the discipline to live it every day, without skipping, without pretending. You want to think differently, then live differently. Wake up when you say you will. Train when no one is watching. Choose truth when lying is easier. Walk away when something disrespects your standard, even if it's comfortable. That is what builds a life, a real life. Not one curated for attention, but one that stands even when storms hit, and storms will come. Your mind must be ready before they arrive, because preparation is the highest form of confidence, and confidence doesn't mean loud, it means grounded. It means knowing that no matter what happens, you will not betray yourself, that your values are not flexible, that your integrity is not seasonal. You carry it through winter, through pressure, through failure, because failure is not your enemy. Avoiding failure, that's the trap. You will lose. You will be misunderstood. You will be overlooked. Let it happen. Let it form you, because pressure reveals your priorities, and adversity reveals your training. How you respond when things fall apart says more about you than how you behave when everything is going well. This is the Stoic way: to walk with preparation, to think with clarity, to live with stillness. You are not in a race. You are in a refinement. You are not here to impress. You are here to align. And alignment requires pruning. You must let go of the version of you that survived but cannot lead. Let him go, with grace, with thanks, with truth, and step into the you that no longer needs permission to rise. There is a kind of peace that cannot be explained. It doesn't come from having less stress. It comes from having more structure, more alignment, more clarity about who you are and who you refuse to be. Most people think peace is found in the absence of difficulty, so they run from pressure. They escape from confrontation, they hide behind busyness, but they never find peace, because they've never built the ability to hold themselves in discomfort. That's the paradox. You don't find peace by avoiding the storm. You find it by becoming the one who can walk through it without losing your center. And that only happens when you choose the harder thing, repeatedly, consistently, without permission. You stop doing what is expected. You start doing what is required. You stop asking, is this comfortable? And start asking, is this in alignment with who I'm becoming? Because that shift is everything. It separates the men who perform from the men who produce, the ones who look the part from the ones who live it, the ones who know the words from the ones who embody the walk. And to live that way, you have to build systems that protect your mission, even when your emotions are unstable, because your emotions will shift, your motivation will dip, your environment will test you, but your structure, Your standard, your system must stay. It becomes your guardrail, your silent accountability. The thing that whispers when no one else is watching. This is who you are, without that you will always default to the level of your lowest excuse. You will overthink, you will overtalk, you will oversleep, you will start and stop 1,000 times and call it bad luck. But it's not bad luck. It's bad structure. You are not broken. You are undisciplined. And discipline is not punishment. It is protection of your mind, of your time, of your potential. You do not rise by chance. You rise by choice. Made repeatedly. When it's boring, when it's hard, when it's lonely, when no one else will know except you. And that is what defines you. Not how high you go, but how consistent you are when nothing seems to work. Because most people quit right before the shift happens, right before the habit becomes a lifestyle, right before the mindset locks in, right before the results start to speak for themselves. They say, I don't see progress. But they haven't stayed long enough to see what progress really feels like. Progress is not always visible. Sometimes it's the absence of anxiety, the absence of self-sabotage, the silence of your mind finally starting to trust you again. That is the reward. And it's not glamorous, but it is grounding. You wake up one day and realize you're not as reactive. You're not as easily distracted. You're not as quick to fold. And no one noticed. No one applauded. But you did, because you built it. Silence. In the dark. When you could have quit, but didn't. That is legacy. Not what they remember about you, but what you remember about yourself. When everything else is stripped away, that you were the one who stood firm, who chose clarity over chaos, who said no to the things that everyone else tolerated, because your peace was worth more than their approval. And that is not a moment. It is a decision, made again and again until it becomes who you are. So let this be the standard. You no longer break your word to yourself. You no longer shrink your standard to fit their comfort. You no longer trade your focus for their noise. This is how the world changes, not by force, but by example. When you think differently, you act differently. When you act differently, you live differently. And when you live differently, you inspire others to do the same, without shouting, without pushing, without demanding, just by becoming. So aligned, so grounded, so unwavering that the world cannot ignore it. That is Stoic clarity. And it starts with one simple decision. I will no longer betray myself to be liked, to be safe, to be understood. I will build the life that reflects who I really am, no matter what it costs, because the cost of avoiding it is greater. You cannot expect the world to respect a standard that you do not enforce in your own life. That's the hard truth. And it's where everything begins to shift. Because for too long we've been trained to wait. Wait for validation. Wait for timing. Wait for certainty. Wait for someone to tell us that we're finally ready. But readiness is a decision, not a destination. You decide that you're done negotiating with mediocrity. You decide that your vision deserves discipline. You decide that this life is not a rehearsal, and when that decision is made, you begin to move differently. You wake up with a sense of order, not because life is easy, but because you are no longer confused about who you are. And confusion is the greatest thief of energy. It's not the work that drains you. It's the indecision before the work. It's the hesitation, the second guessing, the subtle mental battles that happen every day before you even begin. So eliminate the confusion. How? By setting a code, a system, a structure. So clear, That your feelings no longer determine your behavior. That is power. Not the power to control others, but to control yourself. When everything else around you is falling apart, that's the kind of clarity you can feel. In your chest, it changes your voice, your eyes, your pace, because now you're not chasing, you're choosing. And there's a difference. When you chase, you compromise. You adapt your values. You overextend. You pretend. When you choose, you align. You move with calm. You speak less, but say more. This is the depth most never reach, because it requires you to leave behind every excuse that has ever made you comfortable. It requires you to confront your comfort zone, not with judgment but with clarity. You ask, what has this cost me? What has this way of thinking stolen from me? What has this procrastination protected me from facing? Because the truth is, most delays are masks for fear. Fear of discomfort, fear of visibility, fear of failure, fear of finally stepping into the identity you've only spoken about but never committed to becoming. That identity is not waiting for more information. It is waiting for a demonstration. And that happens in the small things. The way you start your morning, the way you close your day, the way you handle distraction, the way you say no without apology. These are not small things. They are the foundation, because character is not built in public. It is revealed there. It is built in the choices you repeat when no one is looking. And if you want peace, stop breaking promises to yourself. If you want clarity, stop allowing chaos to take root in your calendar, your conversations, your thoughts. Protect your mind, like your future depends on it, because it does. What you allow in will shape what comes out. You do not rise from motivation. You rise from mastery of self. You rise from the ability to sit with hard truths without flinching, to face your patterns without justifying them, to live as though your legacy is being written right now, because it is. Every thought is an imprint. Every action is a blueprint. Every silence is a statement. So stop waiting to feel ready. The man you are waiting to become only shows up when you start living like him. You do not attract peace by praying for it. You attract it by removing everything that interrupts it. That means boundaries. That means discipline. That means fewer conversations with people who confuse your vision. Let them go. Not with anger, but with alignment. Because not everyone can come with you. Not everyone is ready to meet the version of you that is finally focused. And that's okay. Growth is not personal. It is necessary. You don't have to announce it. You just have to live it. Live it so clearly that your life becomes a quiet example of what's possible when someone refuses to stay distracted. Let this be your new standard. Will no longer be a man who negotiates his peace for temporary comfort. He will no longer be a man who abandons his structure because of someone else's opinion. I will no longer be a man who lets untrained thoughts lead a life that requires discipline. Because now I know that the real war is not out there. It's within, and it's won every single day in the way I think, the way I move, the way I hold myself when no one is clapping. The highest form of intelligence is not how much you know, but how well you govern yourself when life doesn't go your way. Anyone can stay calm when things go right. Anyone can smile when they're praised. Anyone can be consistent when they're being watched. But the man you become is built when no one is watching, when the reward isn't immediate, when the room is silent and the voices in your head are louder than ever. That's the test, and it's the test you face every day. It shows up in how you wake up, in how you breathe through pressure, in how you move even when it hurts. The average man looks for motivation. The uncommon man builds momentum. He doesn't wait to feel ready. He creates readiness by doing the thing that must be done before the feeling arrives. That is mental freedom. When you are no longer a prisoner to your thoughts, to your cravings, to your environment. When you lead your life with a standard, not with emotion. Because emotion is fleeting. It changes with the wind. But standards hold firm when everything else crumbles. And they will crumble. Life will hit you. Plans will break. People will leave. Your confidence will shake. But if your identity is built on what you do, rather than who you are, it won't survive the storm. You'll collapse. Not because you're weak, but because you built on shifting sand. So rebuild on virtue, on discipline, on clarity. That's the foundation. And from there you move with purpose. Even when the path is foggy. You move because you know you were not made for comfort. You were made for greatness. And greatness isn't loud. It's silent, it's boring, it's repetitive, it's lonely. But it's worth it. Because when you look back, you'll see the moments that shaped you. Weren't the highlights. They were the decisions that no one saw. The ones where you chose to keep going, even when quitting would have felt better. The ones where you chose to be honest even when lying would have been easier. The ones where you chose to be alone rather than remain in a place that insulted your potential. That is how you lead yourself. That is how you change your life. You stop asking, will this be easy? And you start asking, is this necessary? Because necessary is what separates men of depth from men of distraction. Necessary is the road that leads to mental clarity, to spiritual strength, to peace that doesn't shake when circumstances do. So let your life be built on the necessary. The morning rituals, the boundaries, the reflection, the silence, the sacrifices. Let your calendar reflect your character. Let your priorities expose your purpose. Let your solitude reaffirm your sovereignty. Because a man who can sit alone with his thoughts, with his values, with his standard, is a man who can lead others with presence. And presence is what this world is starving for. Not more talk, not more noise, not more speed, but presence. Grounded, steady, still. The kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but earns it without saying a word. You build that by walking your talk, long enough that your steps echo louder than your opinions. You build that by becoming someone who doesn't need to defend their values because their values are visible in the way they carry themselves. This is what happens when you stop living for impressions and start living for impact. When you stop chasing outcomes and start honoring principles. When you stop playing small just to fit inside the version of you that others are comfortable with. It's time to expand, to become too big for the habits that once held you, too bold for the silence that once silenced you, too disciplined for the chaos that once defined you. Because now you know that the most dangerous man is the one who needs nothing except his own word. And that word is final. Not because he's stubborn, but because he's aligned. Not because he knows everything, but because he knows what matters. And what matters is living in such a way that even your shadow stands in integrity. That is the mind you are building. That is the life you are leading, not loudly, but with a calm that shakes the room without saying a word. There comes a time when what used to be enough no longer satisfies you. You outgrow conversations that revolve around blame. You lose interest in proving your point. You find yourself drawn, not to people who make you feel good, but to those who make you feel grounded. That is the evolution of the mind. Not louder, not faster, not more aggressive, but still sharp, measured, because you've seen what chaos costs. You've seen what inconsistency steals, and now you're done paying those prices. This is not about being perfect. This is about being precise. Precise in your time. Precise in your circle. Precise in your execution. Most people never make this shift. They stay scattered, busy, tired, exhausted from managing the consequences of unclear priorities. But you are different now. You have learned that discipline is not restriction, it is refinement. That saying no is not rejection, it is direction. That silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. And when you move from this place, from stillness, from structure, from standard, everything changes. Because now, you don't need the room to agree with you to stand tall. You don't need validation to act with conviction. You don't need praise to keep your word. That is what separates those who rise from those who recycle the same year over and over again. You don't need a new year. You need a new standard, one that says I show up, no matter how I feel. I lead no matter who follows. I speak truth, even when it shakes my voice. Because what matters now is not how you appear, but who you are when no one's looking. That version of you, that private, unpolished, unposted version, that is your legacy. Not what you post, but what you practice. Not what you say, but what you stay loyal to. When it's hard, when it's costly, when it's lonely. Because clarity will often isolate you before it empowers you. You'll lose people when you raise your standard. But you'll find yourself, and that is a trade worth making every time. Because when you know who you are, you don't chase connection, you attract alignment. You don't settle, you select. You don't ask, you decide. You become the one who commands a room, not with ego, but with energy, because people can feel when a man is no longer looking outward for confirmation. They can feel when his values are non-negotiable, when his walk matches his words, when his peace is not performative. That kind of man can be trusted, not because he's flawless, but because he's honest, because he's consistent, because his presence feels like structure. That's what the world needs. Not more noise, not more hustle, not more inspiration, but more examples. More men who wake up and lead themselves so completely that others remember what's possible simply by watching. And that begins with how you think. Not what you think about, but how. How you respond when your plan breaks. How you reset when your emotions spike. How you pause instead of panic. That is thinking elevated. Thinking not built on reaction, but rooted in reflection. You begin to ask, is this mine or was it inherited? Is this truth or just trauma? Is this urgency or is this just ego? That level of questioning reveals clarity, and clarity reveals power. And power is not domination. Power is decision. The ability to make aligned, non-emotional, unapologetic decisions in real time without approval. That is the next level. And it lives inside of you already. It is waiting for the version of you who no longer seeks to feel right, but to live right. You don't need more time. You need more direction, more clarity, more alignment with the version of you who refuses to negotiate with mediocrity. Because the truth is, you already know what to do. You've known it for a long time. But the gap between knowing and becoming is filled with moments of silence where you must choose not comfort, but commitment. And commitment is not built in one big decision. It's built in every small moment where you keep your word when no one is there to remind you why. That is the battlefield, and most lose it, not because they lack desire, but because they lack devotion to themselves, to their standard, to the quiet truth inside them that keeps whispering, you were made for more. But more is not about what you get. It's about what you give up. You give up your excuses. You give up your old story. You give up the version of you that breaks down under pressure and blames the world for what he never took responsibility for. Because responsibility is the gateway to real power. Not control over others, but command over self. Over the thoughts that try to pull you back. Over the impulses that try to hijack your time. Over the distractions that beg you to just be average one more day. But you're not here for average. You're not here to coast. You're not here to blend in. You're here to become the kind of person who cannot be moved by noise, by fear, by circumstance. You build that, not with more knowledge, but with more discipline. You train your mind to be sharper than your emotions. You train your heart to follow your principles, not your pain. You train your habits to build your future, even when your feelings resist it. And that kind of training does not get celebrated. It doesn't go viral, it doesn't get applause, but it gives you peace, it gives you stability. It gives you a kind of confidence that doesn't need to be seen to be real. You become the example you were searching for. You become the man who can hold the standard when everyone else lowers theirs. That doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you're anchored. It means when you fall, you don't question your worth, you recalibrate your direction. It means when you doubt, you don't stop moving. You slow down, but you never quit. And it means when life tests you, you don't flinch. You breathe, you observe, and you respond from truth, not from trauma. This is what it means to live on a higher frequency. Not better than anyone, but better than who you were yesterday. You stop arguing, you stop proving, you stop chasing, and you start building. Silently, powerfully. One aligned decision at a time. And the results, they will come. But they won't be the reward. The reward is who you become in the process. A man of presence. A man of principle. A man who can sit in silence and still feel like he is moving forward because he's no longer distracted by the noise, by the opinions, by the pressure to perform. That is the true freedom. And it only comes when you stop chasing the life you think you should live and start living the one you were built to lead. With discipline, with stillness, with fire. Quiet, but unshakable.